The morning sun hadn't yet reached the compound at Naval Base Coronado in San Diego when Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her car. Her dress uniform was pressed crisp. Her shoes reflected the early light like mirrors. She had earned this assignment through years of blood, sweat, and tears, years that had cost her a marriage, a house, and nearly her sanity. But today was supposed to be different. Today, she was joining SEAL Team 7. She was the first woman to ever be assigned to this particular unit. Sarah walked across the tarmac with her bag slung over her shoulder. The ocean breeze hit her face, salty and cold. She had trained for this moment since she was a kid watching her father come home in his Navy uniform. He had passed away 5 years ago, but she still remembered the pride in his eyes when she told him she wanted to serve. She wished he could see her now. The team was assembled in the ready room when she arrived. 12 men. All of them turned to look at her at the same time, not the welcoming kind of look. It was the kind of look that made her feel like she had walked into a room where she didn't belong. Captain James Hendricks stood at the front of the room. He was a man in his early 50s with gray at his temples and a jaw that looked carved from stone. He wore his reputation like a second uniform, the toughest trainer in the Navy, the man who had taken raw recruits and shaped them into the most lethal warriors in the world. He didn't believe in shortcuts. He didn't believe in exceptions. And from the expression on his face, he definitely didn't believe in women serving on his team. "Gentlemen," Captain Hendricks said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute command, "we have a new member joining us today." He didn't introduce her with warmth or welcome. He stated it like a fact, the way someone might mention the weather. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell has completed all required training. She has passed every physical standard. She meets the qualifications. He paused, and Sarah felt the weight of what came next. So officially she's here, unofficially. He turned to face her directly. His eyes were cold, measuring, dismissive. "Prove you belong here," he barked. His voice filled the entire room, echoing off the walls. "Because I'm not convinced, and neither is this team. You might have a badge and a uniform, but that doesn't mean you belong in the field with men who depend on each other with their lives. Prove it." Sarah felt her face flush. She could feel every man in the room watching her, waiting to see if she would break, cry, or speak back. She knew that whatever she did in the next few seconds would define how they treated her for the rest of her time here. She took a breath, she lifted her chin, and she said nothing. That silence meant everything. "Good," Hendricks said, his tone softer but his words harder. "You know when to shut up. That's step one. The rest is going to be a lot harder." The first week was brutal in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. It wasn't the physical training that broke people down. She could handle that. She had trained for years. She could run faster, shoot more accurately, and push through pain better than most. But there was a different kind of pain that came from being deliberately excluded. The team would go out for drinks and not invite her. They would stop talking when she entered a room. During team briefings, some of the men would make pointed comments about how certain operations were too dangerous or aggressive for someone who might be weaker. They were careful not to say it directly to her face, but they said it loud enough that she could hear. They wanted her to hear. One afternoon during weapons training, Sergeant Cole Rodriguez, a man with a scarred face and kind eyes that didn't match his rough exterior, was paired with her for live fire drills. As they set up their equipment, he said quietly, "Don't let them get to you. Half of them are scared." "Scared of what?" Sarah asked, checking her rifle with methodical precision. "That you might be better than they are," Cole said simply. "That they'll have to work harder to keep up with you. That maybe their way of doing things isn't the only way." Sarah looked at him. "Are you scared?" Cole smiled for the first time since she had arrived. "I think you're going to save my life someday, so no, I'm not scared, I'm grateful." Those words stayed with her. By the end of the first month, Sarah had earned grudging respect from a few members of the team. But Captain Hendricks remained distant, cold, and skeptical. He assigned her to every difficult drill, every impossible task. He seemed to be waiting for the moment when she would ask to be transferred, when she would admit that he had been right all along, that she didn't belong. What he didn't understand was that Sarah had nothing left to lose. She had already lost her marriage, her family relationships, her sense of belonging anywhere. This team, this mission, this chance to prove herself, it was all she had, so she would never quit. Never, not even if it killed her. And soon, she would discover that Captain Hendricks was banking on exactly that. The first real test came during a training exercise in the mountains east of San Diego. It was supposed to be a routine navigation and survival drill. Sarah should have known better than to believe anything was routine with Captain Hendricks. The team was given a GPS location and told to retrieve a package hidden in the wilderness. They had 6 hours to find it and bring it back to base. Sarah was assigned to navigate. Hendricks gave her the coordinates personally, his eyes hard and unreadable. "Don't get lost, Lieutenant Commander," he said. "This is what you signed up for. This is what you need to prove." Sarah took the GPS unit and the map. She checked the coordinates twice, memorizing them before they headed out. As they climbed into the mountain terrain, the weather began to change. Storm clouds rolled in from the coast, dark and heavy. The team pressed forward, trusting Sarah's navigation. That's when she realized something was wrong. The coordinates didn't make sense. They were leading the team toward a cliff edge. She checked the device 3 times. The numbers were correct. But the location was impossible. No package could be hidden on the side of a mountain that dropped 500 feet straight down. Her heart began to race. Either the captain had made a mistake, or this wasn't a mistake at all. She stopped the team just before they reached the cliff's edge. The men gathered around, confused, expecting her to continue forward. "The coordinates are off," Sarah said carefully. "They don't lead to a real location. They're leading us into danger." One of the men, Sergeant Jake Thompson, a large man with a swagger that matched his reputation as Hendricks' favorite, laughed. "Looks like the captain was right. She can't even read a GPS." "I can read it fine," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, even as anger burned in her chest. "Someone gave me false coordinates on purpose." The walk back to base was silent and long. When they arrived, Captain Hendricks was waiting. He looked almost disappointed to see them alive. That night, Sarah made a choice. She was going to find out why the captain had sent her team toward a cliff. She was going to discover what he was really testing, and more importantly, she was going to prove him wrong. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat in her small apartment off base, staring at the GPS coordinates and the map spread out on her kitchen table. Her apartment was sparse: a couch, a bed, a table, and a small kitchen. No pictures on the walls, no signs of a life outside of the Navy. This was by design. She had learned long ago that letting people into your personal space meant giving them ammunition to use against you. The coordinates kept bothering her. She pulled out her laptop and checked them 3 different ways. On Google Maps, at those exact coordinates, there was nothing, just a steep mountainside with a drop-off. But something about the pattern nagged at her. The numbers were too round, too convenient, too much like a test. She opened her email and scrolled back through the messages from the past month. There it was. An email from Captain Hendricks, sent the morning of the exercise with the GPS coordinates attached. She had printed them out, but the email itself was still in her inbox. Sarah clicked on the properties of the email. Something made her check the metadata, the hidden information that attached itself to every digital file. Most people didn't know it was there. Most people didn't care. But Sarah wasn't most people. What she found made her breath catch in her throat. The email had been modified. The original email, sent from Hendricks' account, had contained different coordinates. Someone had edited the email before it reached her, changing the safe coordinates to the dangerous ones. And the timestamp on the modification was interesting. It had been changed just 30 minutes before Sarah opened her email that morning. Someone on the team had deliberately sabotaged the exercise. Someone had wanted her team to fail or worse, and they had wanted it to look like Sarah's mistake. She sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Who had access to the network? Who had the technical knowledge to modify an email without leaving obvious traces? And most importantly, why? The next morning, Sarah scheduled a meeting with Captain Hendricks. She sat across from him in his office, which was as stark and military precise as his personality. The walls were bare except for a few commendations and photographs of him with various military leaders. "Sir, I need to show you something about yesterday's exercise," Sarah said calmly. Hendricks leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Let me guess, you're quitting. You realized this wasn't for you after all." "No, sir, I wanted to show you this." She laid out the printout of the metadata. She explained what she had discovered: the modified email, the changed coordinates, the timeline that proved someone had deliberately sabotaged the mission. Hendricks looked at the evidence for a long moment. Then he looked up at her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes shift. It wasn't approval, but it was something, maybe recognition. "You did good work here," he said slowly. But here's what you need to understand, Lieutenant Commander. This doesn't prove anything in an official sense. This is just data. And data can be explained away. Someone made an innocent mistake. Someone was testing you. Someone was joking around. With our lives, sir, Sarah's voice was sharp. With your worthiness, Hendricks replied. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You think I sent you into danger on purpose. You want to believe that someone on this team betrayed you. But have you considered that maybe I'm just a difficult captain who doesn't trust easily, and my skepticism of you is something you need to overcome, not something you need to investigate? Sarah felt the trap closing around her. Whatever she said next would either make her look paranoid or like she was making excuses. Hendricks was right. The evidence was circumstantial. It could be explained away. But something in his demeanor told her that he already knew something, that this wasn't a surprise to him. I want to know who modified that email, Sarah said firmly. And I want to know why you're spending your time investigating your teammates instead of training with them, Hendricks replied. That's not what a team player does, Lieutenant Commander. That's what someone does when they don't trust their unit. Is that what you're telling me? That you don't trust the men you're supposed to rely on? He had flipped the script on her perfectly. Now if she continued investigating, she would look like a divisive force in the team. If she let it go, she would look weak. Sarah stood up. No, sir, I trust my team. I was just trying to understand what happened. Understand this, Hendricks said, his voice hard again. The next time you want to make accusations, you come to me first with proof that stands up in a court of law, not with conspiracy theories about emails. Is that clear? Clear, sir. But as Sarah left his office, her mind was already working on the next move. She had been dismissed and dismissed cleanly. But she had also learned something important. Captain Hendricks had not seemed surprised by the modified email. He had seemed almost prepared for her to find it. Which meant he already knew about it, and that meant this wasn't random. This was planned. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah started paying attention to everything. She watched how people moved around the base. She noticed who had access to what systems. She observed the patterns of behavior among the team members. What emerged was a slow, sickening picture of a unit that was fracturing along lines of allegiance and control. There was a group of men, led by Jake Thompson, who were fiercely loyal to Captain Hendricks. There was another group, led by Cole Rodriguez, who seemed uncomfortable with the direction the unit was heading. And then there were the men in the middle, trying to navigate between loyalty to their captain and loyalty to their team. Sarah started having quiet conversations with members of the second group. She asked them about their experiences. She listened to their concerns. And slowly, a story emerged that was much larger than a single sabotaged exercise. It started with Corporal David Chen. He was a young man, barely 25, with exceptional technical skills and a brilliant mind for strategy. 3 months ago, he had raised concerns about a pattern he noticed in the team's finances. Equipment was being purchased in ways that didn't make sense. Money was moving through accounts in circles. It looked like, to David's trained eye, potential fraud. David had brought his concerns to Captain Hendricks. 1 week later, David had been reassigned to a different unit. Then there was Petty Officer Marcus Williams, a veteran who had served with Hendricks for 10 years. Marcus had noticed that intelligence reports from certain operations were disappearing from the official records, not accidentally deleted but deliberately removed. When he asked about it, he was told that he was overstepping his authority. He was put on desk duty. And then there was Lieutenant Jack Powell, a promising officer who had actually pushed back against Hendricks in a meeting. He had questioned an order that seemed tactically unsound. The next day, he was transferred out with a recommendation letter that said he was difficult to work with. The pattern was clear now. Captain Hendricks was running the team like a dictator, and anyone who questioned him, who investigated him, or who stood in his way was silenced. And he was testing Sarah to see if she would be another obstacle, or if she would be one of his loyal followers. That's when Sarah realized something even more disturbing. The modified email, the dangerous coordinates, the whole setup, it might not have been about hurting her. It might have been about testing whether she could be manipulated, whether she could be used. If she had gotten lost on that mountain, if she had caused her team to fail, if she had been discredited early on, she would have had no credibility to investigate anything. She would have been done. But she hadn't failed. She had navigated perfectly, and when the coordinates were wrong, she had known it immediately. That meant she might be a threat to Captain Hendricks' operation. Sarah spent the next 3 days documenting everything. She accessed the records of equipment purchases, which were all publicly available. She was careful about that. She looked at the transfer orders for the men who had been reassigned. She gathered every piece of information she could without breaking any rules, without accessing anything classified or private. What she found was damning. Captain Hendricks was running an operation that went far beyond normal military command. He had relationships with private contractors. He was diverting military equipment for private use. The intelligence reports that had disappeared, they seemed to relate to operations that might have been conducted outside official channels. In short, Captain Hendricks appeared to be running an illegal operation, using his command position as cover. And he had been testing Sarah to see if she would find out. Sarah faced a choice. She could go to her commanding officer above Hendricks. She could present her evidence to military investigators. She could blow the whistle and let the system handle it. But Sarah had been in the military long enough to know how the system worked. Hendricks had connections, he had influence, he had a record of success. And Sarah, she was the outsider, the woman, the one who didn't belong. If she came forward now with her circumstantial evidence and her concerns, she would be the one who suffered. At best, she would be dismissed as paranoid. At worst, she would be destroyed. So instead, she did something much more dangerous. She decided to gather undeniable proof. This meant she had to become something she never thought she would be, someone who bent the rules, someone who cut corners, someone who took risks that went against everything she believed about honor and integrity. But she was fighting against a system that had abandoned those principles first. Sarah worked late into the nights, accessing files that were technically available but not widely advertised. She reviewed surveillance footage from secure areas where equipment had been stored. She traced the movements of money through military accounts, following the digital trails like they were breadcrumbs. And slowly, she built a case that would be impossible to explain away. It took 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, Sarah functioned on 4 hours of sleep a night. She barely ate. She focused on nothing except the growing pile of evidence that she was building in a secure folder on an encrypted hard drive that she kept hidden in her apartment. She had printouts of equipment transfers. She had financial records showing money moving to private companies owned by Captain Hendricks' brother-in-law. She had communication logs that showed Hendricks coordinating with private military contractors. And she had something else, something that made her blood run cold. She found references to 3 military operations that had been classified as failed or canceled. But according to the surveillance footage and financial records, these operations had actually happened. And they had involved private contractors alongside Navy SEALs, which meant civilians had been put in positions of danger, military weapons had been used for private purposes, and the operations had been deliberately hidden from official records. Sarah sat in her apartment, staring at the evidence spread out before her. This wasn't just corruption, this was treason. Or at least it was close enough to treason that it would destroy Captain Hendricks' career forever. Which is exactly what terrified her. Because if she presented this evidence, Captain Hendricks would know it came from her. There was no other woman on the team with the access and the knowledge to compile this kind of investigation. He would know, and he would ensure that she paid the price. The night she finished the investigation, Sarah sat on her couch with a cup of cold coffee and made a phone call. It was to a reporter named Jessica Martinez, who worked for a newspaper in San Diego that had a reputation for serious investigative work. Sarah didn't give her name, she didn't explain who she was. She just said, "I have evidence of military corruption, high-level corruption. Are you interested?" Jessica was interested. They met in a parking garage downtown, deep underground where no cameras reached. Sarah gave Jessica a copy of the encrypted hard drive with all of the evidence. She gave Jessica her word that everything on the drive was real, verifiable, and would stand up to scrutiny. "Why not go through official channels?" Jessica asked. She was a smart woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a harder edge. "Because the people I'm exposing are too powerful," Sarah said simply. "And because I'm the only witness. If I go official, they'll destroy me and the evidence will disappear." "But if this goes to the newspaper, your identity will come out eventually," Jessica warned. "I know," Sarah said, "but by then the story will be too big to bury. The truth will be protected by public exposure." Jessica looked at her for a long moment. You're military. It wasn't a question. Yes. And you're going against someone in your chain of command. Yes. That's going to cost you everything, Jessica said quietly. Your career, your reputation, maybe more. Sarah nodded. She had thought about all of this. She had lain awake at night, understanding the full weight of what she was about to do. I know, but if I don't do this, he keeps operating. He keeps hurting people. He keeps using his position to enrich himself, and more people get hurt. Jessica handed back the drive. Upload everything to this cloud server. I'll need to verify every single piece of evidence. I'll need to have lawyers review it. We might not run the story for weeks. Are you prepared for that? To keep acting normal while knowing what's coming? I've been keeping secrets my whole life, Sarah said. I can do this. But it was harder than she expected. The next morning, Sarah walked into the team briefing like nothing had changed. She watched Captain Hendricks lead the meeting with his usual confidence and authority. She watched Jake Thompson laugh at his jokes. She watched Cole Rodriguez listen carefully, his face unreadable. And she felt like she was living in two worlds at once. In one world, she was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, a respected member of SEAL Team 7. In the other world, she was a woman who had just handed over evidence that would destroy her captain. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Jessica sent her a message saying that the lawyers had verified about 70% of the evidence. She needed Sarah to clarify some details about the military structure and the chain of command. But then something happened that Sarah didn't expect. Jake Thompson pulled her aside one afternoon after a training exercise. They were in the locker room, and he seemed genuinely concerned. You okay? He asked. You seem stressed, off your game lately. Sarah's first instinct was to lie, but something in Jake's face made her pause. She remembered that Jake was one of Hendricks' favorites. If anyone would know something was wrong, it would be him. I'm fine, Sarah said, just tired. You know you can talk to me, right? Jake said. Or to any of us. This team is supposed to have each other's backs. It was such a sincere statement, delivered with such genuine concern, that Sarah felt her confidence crack for a moment. What if Jake didn't know? What if he was just a loyal soldier who believed in his captain without understanding what Hendricks was really doing? What if by going through with this, she was about to betray people who had become her friends? I know, Sarah said quietly. Thanks, Jake. That night, Jessica sent her a message. The lawyers had completed their review. The evidence was solid. Jessica was moving forward with the story. It would run in the newspaper in 3 days. Sarah lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, and felt the weight of everything come crashing down on her. In 3 days, her life was going to change forever. 3 days to prepare for the explosion that was coming. 3 days to say goodbye to the life she had built here, to the team that had become her second family, to the dream of serving with honor that had defined her entire military career. 3 days until everyone discovered that she was the one who had brought down Captain James Hendricks. The headline appeared on the front page of the San Diego Daily News on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was at the base gym when her phone buzzed with a notification. Naval corruption ring. Exclusive investigation reveals high-level military officer running private operations using Navy equipment. Below the headline was a photograph of Captain James Hendricks in his dress uniform. Sarah read the article on her phone, even though she knew every word. Jessica had done excellent work. The article was detailed, thorough, and devastating. It laid out the equipment transfers, the financial irregularities, the private contractors, and the hidden operations. It didn't name Sarah as the source. It just said evidence provided by someone with intimate knowledge of the team's operations. But Sarah knew, and within hours, Captain Hendricks would know too. He called an all-hands meeting at 10 o'clock that morning. The team assembled in the ready room, tension hanging in the air like fog. Hendricks looked furious. His jaw was clenched and his eyes were hard as flint. I assume you've all seen the newspaper article, he said. His voice was controlled, but barely. This is the work of a traitor. Someone in this room has spoken to the media. Someone has betrayed my trust and the trust of this team. He looked around the room, his gaze settling on each man in turn. When his eyes reached Sarah, they lingered for a moment longer than anyone else's. We are going to find out who did this, Hendricks continued. And when we do, that person will face military court and everything that comes with it, betraying your commanding officer, divulging classified information. conspiracy. These charges carry sentences that will end a career and destroy a life. After the meeting was dismissed, the investigation began immediately. Military police arrived at the base. They started interviewing people. They requested access to personnel files and communication records. Sarah sat in her small office, waiting for the knock on the door that she knew was coming. She had prepared herself for this. She had rehearsed what she would say, but nothing could actually prepare you for the moment when your life fell apart. The knock came at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. 2 military police officers stood in her doorway. One was a man in his 40s with a blank expression. The other was a younger woman with kind eyes that couldn't quite mask her discomfort. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, we need to ask you some questions about the newspaper article," the male officer said. Sarah stood up and extended her hands, wrists together, as if she was expecting to be handcuffed. "I did it," she said. "I'm the one who talked to the reporter." The officers exchanged a glance. The female officer looked almost relieved. "You're going to need to come with us," the male officer said. The next 72 hours were the darkest of Sarah's life. She was placed in temporary custody while military investigators combed through her apartment and her files. They seized her computer and her hard drive. They questioned her extensively about how she had obtained the evidence, who she had communicated with, and what her intentions were. But here's what saved her. Everything she had done was technically legal. She had accessed publicly available records. She had looked at surveillance footage from areas she had the right to access. She had reviewed financial documents that were part of her job to understand. She had broken no rules, even though she had bent them as far as they would bend. And the evidence she had gathered was real, which meant that even if she faced charges for going to the media, the investigation into Captain Hendricks would proceed. Cole Rodriguez came to see her during the investigation. He found her in the detention area, sitting alone in a small room with concrete walls and fluorescent lights. "I knew it was you," Cole said, sitting down across from her. "I wanted you to know that." "How did you know?" Sarah asked. "Because you disappeared every night for 3 weeks. Because you started asking questions about the men who had been transferred. Because you're the only one on this team with the integrity to do what you did, even knowing what it would cost you." Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. She hadn't cried during any of this. She had forced herself to stay strong to accept the consequences of her choice. But Cole's kindness, his understanding, broke something open inside her. "I betrayed you," she said. "All of you. I went behind the captain's back. I lied about what I was doing." "You saved us," Cole said quietly. "Do you understand that? Everything that came after, all of the operations, all of the corruption, you stopped it. You prevented good people from being used for bad purposes." "But they're calling me a traitor." "Some of them are," Cole agreed. "The ones who believed in Hendricks, the ones who didn't want to see the truth, but the rest of us, we know what you did, and we know why you did it." Over the next week, more evidence came out. The military investigators found exactly what Sarah's evidence had suggested. Captain Hendricks had been running an operation that diverted military equipment and personnel to private military contractors. He had been making money off the operation. He had been hiding it from official records. And when people had questioned him, he had had them transferred. But what came next was the most shocking revelation. One of the private contractors came forward. He explained that some of the operations that Hendricks had authorized were illegal. They had involved the use of military force in ways that violated international law. 3 civilians had been killed in one of the operations, and the deaths had been covered up. Captain James Hendricks was arrested. He was charged with corruption, conspiracy, falsifying official records, and conspiracy to commit crimes against civilians. And Sarah watched it all unfold from her cell. She was facing charges too, officially. She had gone to the media without authorization. She had provided classified information to a civilian reporter. She was being court-martialed. But something unexpected happened during her court-martial. Witness after witness came forward, not to testify against her, but to testify for her. Cole Rodriguez described how the team had been manipulated and controlled. David Chen explained the financial irregularities he had discovered before he was reassigned. Marcus Williams talked about the disappearing intelligence reports. And then Jessica Martinez testified. She explained the public interest in the story, the importance of exposing corruption at the highest levels, and how Sarah had been the only person brave enough to do what was right. The judge listened to all of this evidence, and then she made a remarkable decision. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell will be discharged from the Navy, the judge said. However, the discharge will be characterized as honorable, with a commendation for service to the United States and for having the courage to expose serious crimes and corruption. She will not be imprisoned. It was a compromise. Sarah's military career was over. Everything she had trained for, everything she had sacrificed for was gone. But she would walk out of the courtroom with her honor intact. Her name would not be permanently damaged. She would have a future. But that was only the beginning of the real shock. Because the day the verdict was read, Captain Hendricks' trial was still ongoing, and what came out in that trial would change everything. The testimony that changed everything came on a Thursday afternoon, during the third week of Captain Hendricks' trial. It came from a contractor named Victor Reeves, who had worked closely with Hendricks on the private operations. Captain Hendricks wasn't acting alone, Reeves testified. His voice was steady, as if he had made peace with what he was about to say. There was someone else, someone higher up in the chain of command who authorized the operations and helped cover them up, someone who benefited from the money that was diverted. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Do you know who this person is?" "Yes," Reeves said. "Rear Admiral Thomas Kirkland. He's the commanding officer for all naval operations in the Pacific region." The courtroom erupted. Rear Admiral Kirkland was a decorated officer with 30 years of service. He was on the short list to become Chief of Naval Operations. The idea that he was involved in the corruption was stunning. Within hours, Rear Admiral Kirkland was arrested. Sarah watched the news coverage from her small apartment. She had been released from custody immediately after her verdict. She was home now, trying to figure out what to do with her life, when she saw the breaking news. She watched as military police escorted a visibly shocked Rear Admiral Kirkland into a courthouse. Her phone rang. It was Jessica Martinez. "Did you know about Kirkland?" Jessica asked. "No," Sarah said honestly. "I never found evidence of him. I focused on Hendricks. But looking back, some of the operations I was investigating, they would have needed authorization from someone above Hendricks. I just never had enough information to prove who it was." "Well, now we do," Jessica said. "And Sarah, I wanted to call you personally before we run the story. The truth about why you went to the media in the first place. We're going to make it clear that you were trying to stop corruption, that you exposed a captain who was committing crimes. But we're also going to acknowledge that in doing so, you uncovered a much larger conspiracy that goes all the way to the top." "What will that mean for me?" Sarah asked. "It means," Jessica said carefully, "that you're going to be famous. You're going to be the woman who brought down one of the Navy's biggest corruption scandals. Some people will call you a hero. Some people will still call you a traitor, but your story will be impossible to ignore." Over the next month, that prediction came true. Sarah's story went national. News networks ran pieces about the brave female SEAL who had exposed corruption. Magazines wrote features about her sacrifice and her integrity, and everywhere she went, people recognized her. It was overwhelming and lonely at the same time. She had lost her career. She had no job. She had no idea what came next. Her father, whom she had wanted to make proud, was still gone, and she had a strange feeling he might have been disappointed in how she had done it. By breaking the rules, by going to the media, by choosing exposure over the proper chain of command. But then something unexpected happened. Cole Rodriguez called her. "I'm leaving the Navy," he said. "A lot of us are. The team feels contaminated by what happened. We're trying to decide what to do next." "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked. "That's what I'm calling about," Cole said. "A security firm is being formed. Good people, people who want to do the right thing. They're looking for someone to lead their operations. They thought of you." Sarah felt her heart skip. "I can't lead anything. I just got discharged." "Exactly," Cole said. "You're not beholden to the military anymore. You can make your own rules. You can build something better than what we had." Sarah had never considered it before. But as Cole explained the opportunity, a private security firm that would work for good companies, that would operate with complete transparency and integrity, that would be the opposite of everything Captain Hendricks had built. She felt something shift inside her. Maybe she hadn't lost everything. Maybe she was just starting something new. 3 months after her discharge, Sarah was offered a full pardon by the Secretary of the Navy. It was a symbolic gesture, but it meant something. The Navy was acknowledging that she had done the right thing, that her actions, though they had gone outside the normal chain of command, had been justified. And 1 year after the day that Captain Hendricks had barked, "Prove you belong here," at her in the ready room, Sarah attended Hendricks' sentencing. He received 20 years in prison. Rear Admiral Kirkland received 15. Victor Reeves received probation in exchange for his cooperation. Sarah sat in the back of the courtroom watching Captain Hendricks as the sentence was read. He looked broken, his uniform stripped of insignia, his pride shattered, his future destroyed. And Sarah found that she felt something unexpected, not satisfaction, not revenge, just sadness. He could have been a good leader. He had the intelligence and the skills. But something inside him had been twisted, and he had let that twisted thing grow until it consumed him. After the sentencing, Sarah went to the Navy Memorial in downtown San Diego. She stood looking at the names of the sailors who had died in service. She thought about her father. She thought about all the people she had trained with, all the people she had served with, all the people she had hurt and helped in equal measure. And then she thought about the team. Cole Rodriguez came to work for her. So did David Chen and Marcus Williams. Jake Thompson took a position with a different firm, but he called Sarah and apologized for ever doubting her. Even some of the men who had initially rejected her came around eventually, understanding that what she had done had saved them from becoming complicit in something terrible. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the podium of a military academy in Washington, D.C., speaking to a room full of young soldiers. She told them about her journey. She told them about the fear of not belonging. She told them about the cost of doing the right thing. And she told them something that she had learned through all of this. Belonging isn't something that someone else can give you or take away from you. It's something you build through your actions, through your integrity, and through your willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. The day Captain Hendricks told me to prove I belonged, I didn't know that proving myself wasn't about gaining his respect or his approval. It was about discovering my own power, and that power came from inside me, not from anything he could give me. The young soldiers listened intently, and Sarah understood that this was her new mission. Not as a fighter or a strategist, but as a voice for integrity in systems that often lacked it. 3 seconds after Captain Hendricks barked at her that first day, Sarah had shown him what a real SEAL looked like. But the truth was, it had taken much longer than 3 seconds. It had taken months of pain, sacrifice, risk, and heartbreak, and it had required her to become more than a soldier. It had required her to become a woman willing to stand alone against the tide. That's what a real SEAL looked like. And on quiet nights, when she sat in her office at the security firm, reviewing operations and building a company based on the values she believed in, Sarah understood something that would have been impossible to understand on that first day. She had never needed Captain Hendricks to prove that she belonged. She belonged all along. She just had to do what was necessary to make everyone else see it. And in the end, the only person who needed convincing was herself.